Next question will be for you.
Okay.
And so our candidates know the questions that you're getting were submitted to the Lancaster News, to the Chamber of Commerce, and also were written on cards before the forum started this evening. So forgive me because I've got a couple of questions here that seem to be interwoven. So if it sounds a little disjointed, just work with me here.
Okay.
So let's talk about economic development and its relation to education.
Wonderful.
One of the big challenges facing companies relocating to Lancaster is finding skilled workers. Where do we begin with training today's workforce and our future workforce?
Okay.
And a more specific question that came from the audience, what more can be done with vocational and medical technical training to give high school students motivation to finish high school if they're not interested in moving on to a four-year institution? So, Ms. Powers-Norrell.
My time doesn't start until you finish the question,
yeah,
right?
You're right.
Because that took about a minute and a half.
That was a long question.
Okay, in 2005, the General Assembly passed the Education and Economic Development Act. It's now called Personal Pathways. And the purpose of this act was to make high school more applicable to the kids that weren't going to go on to college. It was to get them involved in things like Business Week, where they were paired up with in apprenticeships with businesses and with other entities that they were interested in, so that they would be more ready to go out into the workforce. The goal was to increase the high school graduation rate, and they have accomplished that goal. The graduation rate has increased by 22% since the Education Economic Development Act was implemented. But when you look at it, of the people of working age in South Carolina, there are 3 million people between the ages of 24 and 64. 18% of those people do not have a GED or a high school diploma. And those people now have children in our public school systems. We've got to focus on adult education. We've got to get those people educated so that they can get back into the workforce. And when they become educated and when they're pursuing a path like that, their children will see their parent taking pride in continued adult education, and the child will then, invest more in their own education. But I tell you what, we have a whole lot of agencies that are working on workforce development. And it's almost like everybody's got an oar in the water and they're paddling in a different direction. And so I think that we need to get all of these agencies, and I'm not going to call their names because they're good agencies, but we need some coordination of this effort. We've got work keys. We need to have every high school graduate who's not going into college to have their work keys certificate so that they can walk right out of high school and right into a job. And once we have this educated workforce, we're going to be a lot better able to attract the businesses that we want to attract to Lancaster County.
Mr. Coy.
Vocational high schools is the biggest thing I see that we need. I'm a product of a vocational high school from another state. When I graduated, I had a residential builder's license. I do not see a problem to sit there and copy and paste that program into this state and then mold it to our needs. When this happens and we put a skilled workforce out there, we will actually start having more tax revenue, and then we can worry about our roads. I know there's a couple of business owners in here that have been looking for skilled labor themselves to increase their business. I would like to see some of these graduates come out of high school and create a business here and not grab them from another state. When we start doing that, we will actually have one of the best counties around.
Mr. Payne?
Well, thank you. I think that's a great question. I'm actually a couple years removed out of high school, so it's an issue that kind of touches home to me because I see a lot of people that I went to school with that are struggling to make it, and I think there are a couple of things that we can do. First, when you go to Columbia, you kind of get grouped in one side of the aisle or another. You're either in public education, or you're a vocational guy, or you're something, you go around. But my argument is, at the end of the day, we ought to be pro-education. And we ought to adopt reforms down in Columbia that are going to increase the amount of opportunities that we give our high school students. So I'd like to see, partnerships with business. There was a superintendent candidate who ran last time for state superintendent of education, and she went around trying to partner students with members of Rotary. And I think that's an excellent idea because you show the students what they have to do to be successful, and I think that's where we can build on there. I also think that we've got to have a right environment, though, and Lancaster County, I think, is a great county. But we've created an environment down in Columbia where we encourage people to leave Lancaster County, and we've done that with education as far as, we don't offer some of the same classes. There are schools in Charlotte, and I know we don't have the same kind of funding that Charlotte does, but there are some that offer Greek, Latin, things like that, and I think we have to expand the opportunities that we give to high school students. I also think that if you have an educated workforce, you also need the right tax environment, though, and we can't expect to grow business with just an educated workforce. We have to have that tax environment as the backbone that encourages people to grow, because if you educate people on how to start a small business, you know that when you start one in Lancaster County and you're going to be hit with the taxes that we have in the state of South Carolina, it's going to be more economically beneficial for you to go to somewhere like Charlotte. So I think you've got to have that tax environment to back up the education too.
Mr. Coy, you wish to comment?
One of the companies I talked to was All American Clothing. I spent about 3 months last year trying to get them to come here, letting them know exactly how skilled of a workforce we have in the textile business. When they replied back to me after going back and forth for about 3 months, their last reply, "You have a great workforce right now. What are you going to offer me?" They weren't interested in the tax structure. They weren't interested in the infrastructure. They want to know, when these people die and retire, what are they going to do? That was their top priority. And then, like I said, the roads will come after we get tax dollars moving.
Mr. Payne, this next question comes to you. Let's go ahead and stay with education. It was touched on by some of you during the last question, which was funding. And if we send you to Columbia, one of the all-time favorite subjects inside the hall is education funding. So let's look at Act 388, one of the favorite subjects of all, an act that dramatically changed our funding model for education. It eliminated half of our property taxes. We love lower tax bills, but how do we increase revenue if we need it? Is it about reducing services, or is it about increasing revenue? Mr. Payne.
Well, I think one of the big misconceptions about Act 388 is it was sold to us as a tax swap. We're going to raise sales tax and raise other things, and we're going to cut your property taxes if your home is valued under $100,000, if I'm not mistaken on that bill. But the problem was we actually saw a massive tax increase under Act 388. And so I think there ought to be reform to Act 388 to start out with, because what we've seen is counties have started to raise taxes, local taxes, which have in turn shifted the tax burden from property tax owners to other sources. So my thing is, I think Act 388 brought in much more revenue than a lot of educators and a lot of the bureaucrats down in Columbia would like to admit. One of the big problems that I see, though, in Columbia is that we spend about $1.8 billion out of our budget. We have about a $6 billion budget. 1.8 of it goes to education in the state. And we can't expect one of the problems that we have is that when we spend this money, it often doesn't get to the teachers and to the classrooms where it's needed the most. And so I'd like to see us cut out some of the red tape that we have going on in Columbia and make sure that we give teachers the right tools that they need to educate students. So,
Ms. Powers-Norrell?
Okay. I want to make sure, is this a school funding question or a tax reform question?
It's school funding.
Okay. And
which could drift into reform.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.